The dining room glowed under strings of fairy lights, the clink of glasses and bursts of laughter filling the air. 40 people gathered around the long tables, plates stacked with roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and Linda Harris's famous apple pie. She'd spent 2 weeks planning this family gathering her daughter Emily's birthday, but she didn't mind the work. At 55, running her own bakery taught her the joy of feeding people. Tonight was supposed to be about joy, about family. Linda moved between tables with a pitcher of lemonade, topping off glasses and smiling as her guests praised the meal. Her husband, Michael, leaned against the wall near the kitchen door, watching her with quiet pride. Their son Daniel waved from across the room, trying to balance a plate in one hand while joking with cousins. Linda's heart swelled. This was her world. But then she noticed her son-in-law Brian standing up. Tall, neatly dressed in his usual tailored shirt, he tapped his glass with a fork. Conversations faded. Even the music lowered as someone reached for the speaker. Brian glanced around the room, his lips curved in a smile too sharp, too rehearsed. Linda set down the pitcher, curious. "Since we're all here," Brian began, his voice carrying easily, "there's something we should address." He placed a hand on Emily's shoulder as if steadying her. Emily looked down at her plate, not meeting her mother's eyes. Linda's stomach tightened. This wasn't on the schedule. Brian cleared his throat and continued, "We've talked as a family." He paused, scanning the room, his gaze locking on Richard and Helen, Linda's parents, who gave the slightest nod. "And we came to a decision." The words seemed to echo in the hush. "We all voted against you, Linda." A ripple went through the guests, forks stilled, glasses were lowered. Linda blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. Brian's smile widened. "No one wants you to host these dinners anymore. You take over everything, and frankly, no one likes the food." The room froze. 40 pairs of eyes landed on her. Some looked away quickly, others stared, waiting for the explosion. Her sister Maggie smirked from across the table, swirling her wine. Her brother Tom rubbed his forehead, avoiding her gaze. Her parents sat stiff, silent but complicit. Linda felt her knees weaken, her hands trembling against the tablecloth. The lemon scent from the pitcher rose in her throat, bitter. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. For years, she had been the one who made birthdays sparkle, Thanksgivings feel whole, Christmas dinners magical. And now, in front of everyone, her own son-in-law declared she was unwanted. Michael stepped forward, jaw tight, but she raised a hand to stop him. She would not let them see her fall apart. She forced a thin smile, though her chest thudded painfully. "Thank you for your honesty," she said, her voice steady though every word scraped her throat. She gathered a few empty plates, stacking them with practiced calm. But inside, her mind reeled. They voted? Without me? Her daughter Emily still wouldn't look up. Maggie whispered something to a cousin and laughed softly. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his face flushed with anger. Chloe, her 20-year-old niece, watched wide-eyed, biting her lip as if she wanted to protest but didn't dare. The silence thickened until someone coughed, and conversations picked up again, awkward and forced, but the air was poisoned. Every laugh rang hollow, every compliment felt like mockery. Linda carried the dishes into the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly that a fork clattered to the floor. She pressed her palms to the counter, her reflection staring back from the dark window above the sink. Her son-in-law's words echoed, cruel and final. "We all voted against you." Her throat burned. She wanted to scream, to demand answers. Why hadn't Emily defended her? Why had her parents nodded? Why had Maggie smiled as if she'd won something? She swallowed hard and steadied herself. One thing was clear, this wasn't just Brian speaking. This was the family, her family. And in that moment, Linda knew the world she'd built. The love she thought was secure was already crumbling. The morning after the party, Linda sat alone at her kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in her hands. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin lines across the polished wood, but she barely noticed. The words from last night clung to her like smoke. "We all voted against you." For as long as she could remember, Linda Harris had been the one who kept her family together. Born the eldest of 3 children, she grew up with responsibility etched into her bones. When her parents, Richard and Helen, argued endlessly during her teenage years. It was Linda who cooked dinner for her younger siblings, who ironed school clothes, who whispered bedtime stories to Maggie and Tom. She had been the reliable one, the caretaker, the fixer. By the time she turned 20, Linda had already married Michael Harris, a steady carpenter with kind eyes and a calm presence. They had built a modest life together, raising 2 children, Emily and Daniel. Money was never abundant, but Michael's craftsmanship and Linda's relentless energy carried them through. When Linda opened her bakery in her late 30s, it became more than a business. It was an extension of her soul. Every pie crust and frosted cupcake carried her devotion, a way of showing love through flour, sugar, and time. Her family came to rely on her talents. Thanksgiving turkeys roasted perfectly golden, Christmas cookies stacked in tins, Easter brunches with quiches and fresh fruit. Linda thrived on it, not because she sought recognition, but because feeding others filled her with purpose. She believed those dinners bound the family, reminding them of who they were. But that devotion came at a cost. She remembered the morning she rose at 4:30 to knead dough before heading to Daniel's soccer games. The countless times she skipped resting on weekends to plan birthday menus. Even when her hands ached from kneading or her feet throbbed after hours at the bakery, she pushed through. Because that was who she was, the one who showed up, the one who made sure everyone else was cared for. Yet cracks had formed over the years. Her parents often criticized her for being too controlling. Helen once scolded her at a Thanksgiving table. "You don't let anyone breathe, Linda. You run these dinners like an army camp." Richard chuckled along, thinking it a harmless joke, but the sting lingered. Her sister Maggie never hid her resentment. Owning a small furniture store, Maggie wanted admiration too, but Linda's talent for creating memorable gatherings always stole the spotlight. Whenever guests praised Linda's meals, Maggie's smile tightened. She had once whispered, after a Christmas party, "You act like the matriarch, but you're not. You just cook." Even Emily, her own daughter, began to distance herself. At 28, working in marketing and married to Brian, Emily often dismissed her mother's traditions. "Nobody cares about centerpieces, Mom," she'd say, scrolling on her phone as Linda fussed with flowers. Emily wanted sleek restaurant dinners, not long evenings in her mother's kitchen. Only Daniel, now 25 and finishing law school, still seemed to appreciate her. He often visited the bakery, offering to taste new recipes, reminding her, "You're the glue, Mom. Don't forget that." His words kept her steady, though sometimes even he couldn't drown out the chorus of complaints. And then came Brian, polished, ambitious, always calculating. From the moment Emily introduced him, Linda sensed something cold beneath his charm. He dismissed her bakery as a cute hobby, ignoring the years of sweat it took to build. During family dinners, he'd complain about portions or timing, as if her work was beneath him, yet Linda endured, biting her tongue for Emily's sake. Now his voice was the one that delivered the final blow, echoing with smug authority, "We all voted against you." Linda stared at her reflection in the dark coffee, her chest heavy. She thought of the decades she had poured herself into this family, her parents, her siblings, her children, and still, it wasn't enough. They hadn't seen her love. They'd only seen control. Her hands tightened around the mug. Maybe she had given too much. Maybe, in trying to hold everything together, she had forgotten to hold herself. Michael entered the kitchen, brushing sawdust from his shirt. He kissed her cheek gently. "You okay?" She forced a smile, shaking her head. "I don't know." He didn't press, but his hand lingered on her shoulder, grounding her. Linda closed her eyes, her mind racing with questions. Had she sacrificed her own peace for a family that never wanted her efforts? Why did their approval matter so much? The silence in the kitchen seemed to whisper the truth she wasn't ready to admit. Last night had changed everything. And as the sun rose higher, Linda realized her story was no longer about keeping the family together. It was about deciding whether they were even worth the fight. The Harris family looked polished on the outside, smiles in holiday photos, matching sweaters at Christmas, perfectly decorated cakes for every milestone, but Linda knew the fractures ran deep. Her parents, Richard and Helen, were first in line when it came to judgment. Richard, 75, retired after decades in government work. He was precise and stern, a man who believed authority was meant to be unquestioned. Helen, 72, had once been a school teacher, sharp-tongued and unwilling to bend. Together, they had shaped Linda's childhood with rules and expectations, teaching her that love was conditional and respect had to be earned. Even now, they looked at her not as the woman who held countless dinners together, but as the daughter who always tried too hard. Her siblings carried their own grudges. Maggie, her younger sister, never forgave Linda for being the golden child. At 50, Maggie owned a furniture shop, but it never seemed enough to her. She wanted the recognition Linda often received. And whenever family praised Linda's cooking or organizational skills, Maggie's envy turned acidic. Linda had caught the smirks, the eye rolls, the comments muttered just loud enough. She acts like she's queen of this family. Tom, her brother, was softer in demeanor. At 53, working as an engineer, he preferred silence to confrontation. But that silence had a cost. Linda had hoped Tom would step in when things grew cruel, when their parents' words cut too sharply, when Maggie's jealousy spilled out, but he rarely did. He folded his arms, avoided eye contact, and stayed neutral, even when neutrality felt like betrayal. Her daughter Emily had once been her closest ally. As a child, Emily shadowed Linda in the kitchen, stirring batter, licking frosting from spoons, beaming with pride when guests praised her mother's pies. But adulthood brought distance. Emily, now 28, had built a sleek career in marketing, where glossy campaigns mattered more than family recipes. She rolled her eyes at her mother's traditions, calling them outdated, even embarrassing. And since marrying Brian, her tone had sharpened. Emily didn't just ignore Linda's efforts, she openly questioned them. Brian himself had become the face of conflict. He was 32, ambitious in finance, with a knack for positioning himself as the voice of reason. But Linda saw through him. He wasn't just critiquing her food, he was seizing authority. His announcement at the party proved it. With those words, "We all voted against you," he had gathered the silent grievances of the family and turned them into a public humiliation. Daniel, her son, was the one person who still treated her like the backbone of the family. At 25, studying law, he often challenged Brian during casual debates at the dinner table. He stood taller, prouder when defending his mother, though Linda worried about the toll it took. She wanted peace for him, not the endless cycle of tension. And then there was Chloe, Tom's daughter, barely 20, quiet yet observant. She had been the only one at the party whose eyes shone with outrage when Brian spoke. Linda remembered the way Chloe's jaw had tightened, how she bit her lip as if holding back words. That small flicker of loyalty had kept Linda from collapsing. But the larger truth couldn't be ignored. There were whispers at every gathering about Linda's need to control, her obsession with perfection, her bland food. She had overheard cousins once joke that family dinners felt more like corporate events. Those words had stayed with her, small cuts that grew into wounds. The mounds of evidence stacked quietly over the years. Her parents nodding when others criticized her, Maggie competing with every event she hosted, Emily growing colder, Brian pulling strings, Tom staying silent. The betrayal at the party hadn't come out of nowhere. It was the climax of a slow, creeping resentment that had been allowed to grow unchecked. Linda stirred a pot of soup at the stove that afternoon, her movements automatic. Michael sat nearby, carving wood for a project, his presence a comfort. "You're quiet," he said softly. "They've been building this for years," Linda replied, her voice low. Last night was just the moment they finally said it out loud. Michael set down his carving knife, meeting her eyes. "You've carried them for too long. Maybe it's time to ask why." Linda tightened her grip on the spoon. She thought of Maggie's smirk, Emily's silence, her parents' approving nods. The weight of their judgment pressed on her chest. She had always believed that family loyalty was sacred, that blood demanded effort, forgiveness, and sacrifice. But now, staring into the simmering soup, she wondered if loyalty had been a one-way street. The cracks were widening. Something deeper was brewing, something hidden beneath the surface smiles. Linda could feel it. There was more to this than resentment over food or control. She just didn't know yet how far the betrayal reached. 2 nights after the disastrous party, Linda sat at her bakery counter long after closing. The smell of cinnamon rolls still lingered in the air, but she couldn't taste or enjoy it. Her mind replayed Brian's words like a broken record. "We all voted against you." Every syllable felt like a nail driven deeper into her chest. She told herself not to obsess, yet the questions wouldn't stop. Who exactly had been part of this so-called vote? Her parents, of course, they'd nodded along. Maggie, too, with her smirk. But Emily? Her own daughter? Tom? Even cousins who'd eaten seconds of her food? The betrayal felt bottomless. Linda tapped her fingers against the counter, then opened her phone. For years, she'd been the one to manage the family group chat, reminding people of birthdays, arranging schedules, sending shopping lists for potlucks. She had muted it after the party, unwilling to see their chatter. Now she scrolled back, scanning messages with new eyes. There it was, a week before the party. A message from Maggie. Maybe this year, Emily and Brian should take over planning. Fresh ideas. A string of likes followed her parents, a couple of cousins, even Emily herself. Linda's stomach tightened. She hadn't noticed it before, too busy with flour and frosting. She kept scrolling. Brian had chimed in, "I'll handle logistics. We need less chaos, more structure." The irony stung him, accusing her of chaos when she'd been the one to make order out of their mess for decades. Her hands shook as she closed the app. The group chat was no longer hers. It had become the stage where her own family plotted her removal. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. Michael breathed steadily beside her, but Linda stared at the ceiling. At 2 a.m, she slipped out of bed, padding into the living room. She needed air, space, answers. That's when she noticed a folder on the coffee table, Daniel's law school notes. She reached for it, intending to tidy it away, when a folded piece of paper slipped out. It wasn't his handwriting. It was Maggie's. Linda recognized her sister's looping letters immediately. "Brian has the connections. The restaurant downtown is perfect. We'll make it official after the family party. Don't worry, once Linda is out of the picture, they'll have no choice but to support us." Linda's breath caught. She read it twice, then 3 times, the words searing her mind. Restaurant, connections, out of the picture. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. Maggie wasn't just trying to embarrass her. She and Brian were planning something that required Linda to be pushed aside. The next morning, Linda moved like a ghost through her routine, baking muffins for the shop, greeting customers with forced cheer. But under the surface, her mind buzzed. If Maggie and Brian were scheming, there had to be more evidence. She couldn't accuse them without proof. So she started watching more closely. At Daniel's encouragement, she borrowed his old laptop, learning how to scroll through cached messages, how to spot deleted files. One evening, Chloe stopped by the bakery after class, hesitant at first but eventually sliding her phone across the counter. "Aunt Linda," Chloe whispered, "I think you should see this." On the screen was a screenshot from the family group chat, one Linda hadn't seen before. Maggie again. "Brian says we need at least $50,000 to get this deal off the ground. Don't worry, Mom and Dad will cover part if we frame it as a family investment." Helen's reply followed, curt and approving. "If it keeps Linda from interfering, fine." Linda's chest constricted. $50,000. That wasn't a family dinner budget. That was a scheme. And her parents were not only aware of it, they were supporting it. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the sting of tears. Chloe looked at her nervously. "I didn't know if I should show you, but you deserve to know." Linda nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She reached across the counter, squeezing Chloe's hand with trembling fingers. That night, when Michael found her sitting in the kitchen surrounded by papers and printouts, she finally let the words spill. "They're not just against me. They're using me, erasing me to cover their tracks. Brian and Maggie, they're pulling everyone in." Michael's jaw clenched. He gathered the papers, flipping through them, his carpenter's hands steady even as anger sharpened his eyes. "Then we find out exactly what they're hiding, and we don't let them bury you." Linda exhaled shakily. For the first time since the party, the fog of humiliation began to lift. Beneath it, a new resolve stirred. She would no longer be blindsided. If her family had turned against her, she would uncover every secret they were hiding one by one. The next week unfolded like a bad dream, every conversation tinged with suspicion. Linda no longer moved through her days on autopilot. Instead, she listened. She noticed pauses where voices used to be steady, glances exchanged across rooms, the faint edge of guilt that flickered in her relatives' eyes when they thought she wasn't watching. At the bakery, customers praised her pastries as usual, but Linda found herself staring past them, her thoughts tangled with questions. What exactly were Maggie and Brian planning? Why did her parents go along with it? And why had Emily, the little girl who once begged to lick frosting from the mixing bowl, chosen silence over loyalty? On Thursday, Chloe stopped by again after her college classes. She ordered a blueberry muffin, then lingered at the counter, twisting the wrapper in her hands. "Aunt Linda," she said in a low voice. Something else happened. Linda leaned closer. "Tell me." Chloe pulled out her phone, scrolling to a recent text exchange. "Dad didn't want me to show you, but you should see it." It was a message from Tom to Maggie. "If you're serious about this restaurant thing, I want no part of it. But leave Linda out of your games. She's done enough for this family." Maggie's reply came quick and sharp. "Don't be dramatic. This is business. Linda clings to control anyway. She'll be fine once we move on." Linda's stomach dropped. The words confirmed what she had feared. Maggie wasn't just casually mocking her. She was deliberately carving her out of the family narrative. And Tom, though hesitant, had stayed silent in public. His text showed some conscience, but his inaction still stung. She handed Chloe's phone back, her voice steady but heavy. "Thank you for trusting me." Chloe hesitated, then added, "They don't see you, Aunt Linda, but I do." Her eyes were fierce, filled with a loyalty that warmed Linda's chest even as her heart ached. Later that evening, while tidying the bakery's books, Linda found another piece of the puzzle. She was balancing receipts when she noticed a charge on her joint family account, a catering deposit of $5,000. The note simply read, "Event booking, Carter." Her pulse quickened. Carter, Brian's last name. He had used a family account, one her parents still had access to book something extravagant. $5,000 wasn't pocket change. It was the first step towards something much larger. Linda printed the receipt and tucked it into a folder she'd started keeping hidden in her office drawer. Every scrap mattered now: screenshots from Chloe, stray notes from Maggie, receipts that didn't add up. She was piecing together a story that her family clearly wanted buried. That weekend, she attended a small neighborhood barbecue hosted by her friends. Away from the tension of her relatives, she finally exhaled. Neighbors asked about the family party, and Linda forced a polite smile, dodging details. But then one of them, Sarah, leaned in. "Funny thing," Sarah said, sipping her iced tea. "I ran into your sister Maggie at the store last week. She was bragging about opening a high-end bistro soon, said she and Brian had investors lined up. She made it sound like a done deal." Linda froze, her ribs tightening. Maggie was already spreading the word publicly. Not just an idea, not just whispers in the family chat she was boasting to outsiders. Sarah tilted her head. "I thought you'd be involved. She made it sound like a family project." Linda forced a tight smile, murmured something about being too busy with the bakery, and excused herself. Inside, though, her mind raged. Maggie was using her reputation, her years of labor, her very name to lend credibility to this scheme while simultaneously trying to erase herself from the picture. When Linda got home, Michael was in his workshop sanding a chair leg. She set the printed receipt on the workbench in front of him. $5,000, she said. Brian booked catering. And Maggie's telling people about a bistro. Michael's jaw tightened. He brushed sawdust from his hands and met her eyes. "They're betting no one will question them. They think you'll stay quiet." "Not anymore," Linda whispered. She looked at the growing folder of evidence tucked under her arm. "They want me out, but I can see through them. They've underestimated me." Michael nodded, his expression grim but proud. "Good. Then let's keep digging. We'll be ready." As Linda climbed the stairs that night, she paused at the landing, her heart still heavy. For decades, she had been the family's foundation. But now, cracks spread beneath her feet, revealing something far darker than complaints about her cooking or jokes about control. Her family wasn't just ungrateful. They were building something on lies, and they were willing to bury her to make it happen. And as painful as the betrayal was, Linda knew one thing with certainty. The truth would come out, and when it did, the family would never look the same again. By Monday morning, Linda's bakery felt colder than usual. She wiped down the glass display, but her thoughts weren't on the trays of muffins or rows of cinnamon rolls. They were on the sudden shift she could feel coming the way a storm rolls in long before the rain falls. She didn't have to wait long. The first blow landed when she overheard two customers whispering near the register. "Did you see what Maggie posted?" one murmured. "Yeah," the other replied, pulling out her phone. "Something about Linda's bakery being outdated. Said the family doesn't even eat here anymore." Linda's chest tightened. She forced a smile as she rang up their pastries, but her hands trembled slightly. Later, during her lunch break, she opened her own social media account. There it was, a post from Maggie, public for everyone to see. "Exciting things ahead. Brian and I are working on a modern bistro concept. Finally, something fresh for the family and community. We're tired of the same old controlling style of certain people who think food is just sugar and grease. Times are changing." Dozens of likes, clapping emojis, supportive comments. Linda scrolled further, her stomach twisting. Her mother, Helen, had commented, "So proud of you two. Can't wait to see it." Richard added a simple thumbs up. Emily had shared the post without comment. It wasn't just shade, it was a deliberate dig, painting Linda as obsolete, clinging to an outdated way of life. That evening, the phone rang. Linda answered, thinking it was a customer. Instead, it was Richard. "Linda," her father said sharply, "we need to talk about finances." Her pulse spiked. "What about them?" "You've been keeping control of the family account too long. Brian tells me you're not contributing enough, yet you still use it for your bakery expenses. That's not fair." Linda gripped the counter. "My bakery has nothing to do with the family account. Every receipt is documented. Brian used it for a $5,000 catering deposit, not me." There was a pause, then Richard's voice hardened. "Brian explained that. He's investing in something bigger. You, on the other hand, spend money on pies and parties no one wants anymore." Her mother's voice cut in from the background. "You're draining resources, Linda. Maybe it's time you hand the finances over to someone more responsible." Linda hung up before her voice cracked. She stood there, phone in hand, her body buzzing with fury and disbelief. They weren't just undermining her, they were trying to paint her as reckless, incompetent, even dishonest. That night, Emily showed up at the house. She didn't knock. She walked in, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor. "Mom," she said, her tone clipped, "Brian and I think it's best if you step back from family decisions. You've been making everyone uncomfortable for years. Honestly, it's exhausting." And Daniel stood from the couch, his eyes blazing. "You can't just walk in here and accuse Mom like that." Emily shot him a glare. "Stay out of it. You don't know what it's like for the rest of us. She micromanages everything. Birthdays, holidays, she acts like it's her empire. We're sick of it." Linda's throat burned. "Emily, is that really how you see me?" Her daughter folded her arms. "It's how everyone sees you. You should hear the things people say behind your back." The words landed like daggers. Linda wanted to scream, to remind Emily of the nights she stayed up sewing costumes for school plays, the mornings she baked cupcakes for every class party. Instead, she just whispered, "Get out." Emily flinched but didn't argue. She turned on her heel and left. By the end of the week, Linda's reputation was unraveling. Maggie posted again, this time implying Linda was too controlling to let others succeed. Some people hoard responsibility not out of love, but out of fear of losing control. That's not family, it's dictatorship. Brian added fuel by posting photos of himself at fancy restaurants, captioning them, "This is what real food looks like. No more bland dinners." Comments piled in from relatives and acquaintances. Some agreed, others stayed quiet. Very few defended Linda. On Saturday, Chloe arrived at the bakery with tears in her eyes. "Aunt Linda, they're saying terrible things about you online. People are sharing Maggie's posts. Even some cousins commented that you've always been controlling." Linda's hands shook as she set down a tray of scones. "They're rewriting everything I've done for this family. Years of sacrifice reduced to gossip." Michael walked in, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "They can say what they want. Lies don't last forever." But Linda wasn't so sure. Her entire identity, mother, daughter, sister, baker, was under attack. Her own family was leading the charge, and the world seemed eager to believe them. That night, lying awake, she realized she had two choices: shrink into silence or fight back. For decades, she had been the one who held everything together. Now, as the storm raged louder, she began to wonder if it was time to let it all fall apart so the truth could finally come to light. By Sunday afternoon, Linda felt the walls closing in. Her bakery was still full of loyal customers, but every smile felt fragile, every compliment suspicious. Did they believe Maggie's posts? Did they whisper about her the moment they left with their pastries? At home, the silence was heavier. Emily hadn't called since her confrontation. Richard and Helen ignored Linda's messages. Maggie continued to post vague insults online, and Brian filled his feed with staged photos of wine glasses and polished menus, as if their imaginary bistro already existed. The family who once crowded her kitchen had gone quiet except when they tore her down. Linda sat at the dining table late one evening, papers spread in front of her, the catering deposit receipt, the printouts Chloe had given her, the cruel posts. She rubbed her temples, her heart pounding with exhaustion. Michael set a cup of tea beside her. "You haven't eaten all day," he said gently. Linda shook her head. "I'm not hungry. I can't stop thinking, what if they've convinced everyone? What if everything I've done 30 years of dinners, birthdays, sacrifices is just erased?" Michael pulled out a chair, his hand covering hers. "They can't erase the truth, not from the people who really know you." Across the room, Daniel looked up from his textbooks. "Mom, you're letting their noise get in your head. Everyone at my law school knows you as the woman who brings pies to study groups. Nobody thinks you're controlling. They think you're generous." His voice carried conviction, but Linda's heart still ached. "Then why doesn't my own daughter think that?" she whispered. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. The next morning, Chloe stopped by before class. She hugged Linda tight, holding on longer than usual. "I told Dad he should stand up for you," she said fiercely. "He just said it's complicated, but I don't care, I'm on your side." Linda hugged her back, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Thank you, sweetheart, you don't know how much that means." Chloe pulled away, her eyes bright. "You've always been the one who shows up. People see it, even if they pretend not to." Her words soothed Linda's bruised heart, if only for a moment. That evening, Sarah, the neighbor who had known Linda for nearly 15 years, knocked on the door with a casserole dish in her hands. "You looked pale at the grocery store yesterday," Sarah said. "Thought you could use a break from cooking." Linda chuckled bitterly. "Funny, considering the whole family thinks I should never cook again." Sarah set the dish on the counter and crossed her arms. "Let me guess, Maggie and Brian stirring the pot?" Linda nodded. "They've turned everyone against me. Even my parents, even Emily." Sarah pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Listen to me. Families can be brutal. Sometimes they see the person who does the most and convince themselves that she does it for control, but that's not your truth." Linda stared at her hands. "Then what do I do? They've taken my reputation, my role, everything I thought I was to them." Sarah leaned forward. "You stop chasing their approval. You start protecting yourself. If they're scheming, expose them. But don't break yourself trying to win back people who never valued you in the first place." The words landed like a spark. Linda felt her throat tighten, but she managed a nod. "Protect myself," she repeated softly. That night, after Sarah left, Linda sat with Michael and Daniel in the living room. The TV hummed quietly, but no one paid attention. Chloe texted from her dorm, "Love you, Aunt Linda. Don't forget you're stronger than them." Linda read it twice, her chest swelling with both pain and gratitude. She realized that while her circle had shrunk, it was sharper, clearer. Michael's steady love, Daniel's loyalty, Chloe's fierce courage, Sarah's blunt wisdom. She wasn't completely alone, but she was, undeniably, isolated from the family she had once built her life around. And as she looked at the folder of evidence sitting on the coffee table, Linda knew the isolation wouldn't end until she decided, would she let the betrayal consume her, or would she rise and fight back? For the first time, she felt the faint stirrings of an answer. The next Friday evening, Linda was sweeping the bakery floor when the bell above the door jingled. She expected a late customer, but instead, a man in a charcoal suit stepped inside. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his leather briefcase worn but polished. For a moment, she didn't recognize him, then her breath caught. "Mark?" she whispered. "Linda," he said, offering a hesitant smile. Mark Reynolds had been her classmate decades ago, now a practicing attorney in town. They hadn't spoken in years, but she remembered his kindness, his sharp mind. He set his briefcase on a corner table and lowered his voice. "I shouldn't be here without warning," he admitted, "but I have something you need to know." Linda put down her broom, her chest tightening. "What is this about?" Mark sighed. I've been reviewing some contracts for a client, turns out. The client is Brian. He didn't realize I knew you, or maybe he didn't care. But I saw your family name on documents, and I couldn't stay quiet. He slid a folder across the table. Linda's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were copies of loan applications, signed in Brian's clean, deliberate handwriting. But her eyes widened when she saw her parents' names, Richard and Helen, listed as guarantors. The numbers hit like a punch. $50,000 in initial investment capital. Her voice cracked. $50,000? For what? Mark tapped the page. A partnership contract with Maggie. They're trying to launch a high-end bistro. The collateral listed, your family home, your parents' property. And Brian positioned himself as the majority owner. Maggie holds shares too. But you? He shook his head. You've been erased. Linda's knees nearly buckled. She sank into a chair, clutching the papers. The betrayal was deeper than insults or online posts. They weren't just pushing her aside socially. They were building their future on the foundation she had laid, using the Harris family name and assets, while branding her as the problem. Mark leaned closer. Linda, I know this is hard, but if they default, your parents could lose everything, and they'll blame you even though you had no say. Tears pricked her eyes. Why didn't they tell me? Why would my own parents agree to this? Mark's expression softened. Because Brian convinced them you were controlling, unreliable. That's why the public humiliation at the party mattered. He needed everyone to see you as unfit before he could take over. The memory of Brian's smug face at the party burned in her mind. We all voted against you. It hadn't been about food at all, it was about power. Mark closed his briefcase. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I wanted you to have the truth. You deserve to protect yourself. Linda rose, gripping the folder like a lifeline. Thank you, Mark. I don't know what I'll do yet, but thank you for not letting me stay in the dark. After he left, Linda locked the bakery door and sat alone in the dim light. The papers spread across the table felt heavier than stone. Her sister, her son-in-law, her parents. They had gambled not only money but their dignity, and they had sacrificed her reputation to do it. Later at home, she laid the documents before Michael and Daniel. Michael's jaw tightened as he read. Daniel's face flushed with anger. They used Grandma and Grandpa's house as collateral? Daniel said sharply. That's insane. Michael met Linda's eyes, steady and firm. This isn't about you being controlling, Linda. This is about them being reckless. They needed you out of the way to pull this off. Chloe came by the next day, and when Linda showed her the folder, her niece's eyes widened. They lied to everyone. They're risking the family name just to chase some dream restaurant? Yes, Linda whispered, her throat tight. And they'll let me take the fall if it collapses. The realization hollowed her out, but beneath the ache, something else stirred, something fierce. For the first time, she wasn't just the victim of their cruelty. She held the truth, and with it, power. Linda closed the folder, her hands steady now. They wanted me erased, but they forgot I've always been the one who keeps the records, who notices the details. They underestimated me. Michael placed a hand on hers, pride flickering in his eyes. Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharp with resolve. So, what's our next move? Linda exhaled slowly, the weight of betrayal pressing down, but also the spark of determination rising. For decades she had carried her family. Now she would carry the truth. And when the time came, she would lay it bare for everyone to see. Linda sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the folder from Mark spread out like a map of betrayal. The papers blurred under her tired eyes, but she forced herself to read every line again and again. Brian's signature gleamed across loan applications, Maggie's name nestled neatly beside his, and her parents' shaky handwriting sealed their guarantee. The numbers screamed from the page. $50,000 invested, secured by the Harris family home. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't whispers or smirks. This was evidence. Solid, undeniable proof. Michael came down the stairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He stopped when he saw her hunched over the documents. You're still at it, he said gently. I can't stop, Linda whispered. Her voice cracked as she pressed a hand against the paper. They're risking everything we've built, and they cut me out like I never existed. Michael pulled up a chair and studied her. You've always been the careful one, the one who paid attention. If you hadn't seen this, none of us would know. They think you're weak because you host dinners and bake pies, but you've been holding this family together all along." His words steadied her, but the ache in her chest deepened. Why did they hate her for the very things that made her strong? The next morning, Linda called Daniel into the kitchen before he left for school. He scanned the documents, his brow furrowing. "This is worse than I thought," he muttered. "Mom, if Brian and Aunt Maggie default, Grandma and Grandpa could lose their home. And legally, Brian has maneuvered himself to walk away with the majority share." Linda rubbed her temples. "And I'll be blamed for not stepping in, for being too controlling or not controlling enough. Somehow, it'll always be my fault." Daniel slammed the folder shut. "Not this time. You have proof. They can't twist this against you." Chloe came over that evening, her backpack slung over her shoulder. She slid into a chair, her eyes darting to the folder. "Is that what Uncle Mark gave you?" Linda nodded. "It's real. They're gambling with the family's future, and they needed me out of the way to make it happen." Chloe's eyes widened. "That's why Brian humiliated you at the party. He wanted everyone to see you as bossy and outdated, so no one would believe you if you pushed back." Linda's throat tightened. Hearing it spoken aloud by her niece made it cut even deeper. But Chloe wasn't finished. "Aunt Linda, you can't keep this quiet. If they lose everything, the whole family will suffer. You need to tell the truth before they destroy us all." Linda's hands trembled as she gathered the papers back into the folder. She knew Chloe was right. She could no longer stay silent, no matter how much it hurt. That night, she dreamed of the family party again. The clinking glasses, the silence after Brian's announcement, the 40 pairs of eyes waiting for her to break. Only this time, she wasn't standing empty-handed. She held the folder, thick with proof, and in the dream, when she opened it, the whole room gasped. She woke with her heart racing, the echo of that imagined gasp still in her ears. The following day, while Michael worked in his shop and Daniel studied upstairs, Linda sat in the quiet kitchen and made her decision. She would no longer absorb the blows in silence. The documents gave her a weapon not of vengeance but of truth. She pulled out a notebook and began drafting a plan. Step 1. Secure copies of every document. Step 2. Speak to a financial advisor. Confirm the risks. Step 3. Prepare to confront them, not in whispers or text messages, but in front of everyone, just as Brian had done to her. Her pen dug into the page with each line. For the first time in weeks, her fear shifted into resolve. They had humiliated her in public, and that was where she would reveal their deceit. Michael entered quietly, setting a cup of tea by her elbow. He glanced at the notebook and raised a brow. "Planning something?" Linda met his gaze, her voice firm. "I'm planning to fight back." He smiled faintly, pride flickering in his eyes. "That's the Linda I know." Linda closed the folder and held it against her chest. The betrayal still stung, but it no longer hollowed her out. With proof in hand, she wasn't just a victim anymore. She was the one holding the truth, and soon, everyone else would see it. The next morning, Linda woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. The betrayal still gnawed at her, but now it had shape, weight, evidence. She was no longer stumbling in the dark. She had a folder full of truth, and with it, a chance to reclaim her voice. She sat at the kitchen table with a fresh pot of coffee, the folder spread open like a battle plan. Michael joined her, his carpenter's hands rough against the smooth paper as he flipped through the contracts. "We can't go into this blind," he said. "If you confront them without preparation, they'll twist it back on you. That's what they've always done." Linda nodded. "I know. That's why we need a strategy. This time, I won't let them corner me." By mid-morning, Daniel came downstairs, his textbooks tucked under his arm. He paused when he saw the papers. "Are we doing this?" "Yes," Linda said firmly. "But carefully." Daniel sat, scanning the contracts again. "We need copies of everything digital and physical. If Brian realizes you know, he might try to alter or hide the paperwork. I'll back these up on a secure drive." Michael disappeared into his workshop and returned with a portable scanner. Linda watched her son feed each page carefully, the soft hum of the machine a reminder that this time she was building her own defense. When they were done, Daniel slipped the drive into his pocket. "We've got insurance now. Even if they burn the originals, they can't erase this." That afternoon, Linda called Mark Reynolds. Her voice shook only slightly as she asked, "Would you meet me again? I need advice on how to use this." Mark agreed to meet her at his office the next day. But even as she prepared, doubts whispered. Could she really stand in front of her parents, her siblings, her own daughter and expose their lies? Would they listen, or would they call her vindictive, controlling, bitter? That evening, Sarah stopped by with a basket of fresh bread. She noticed the tension in the room, the stack of documents on the table. "What's all this?" she asked. Linda hesitated, then told her everything, the loans, the bistro, the collateral. When she finished, Sarah shook her head, disbelief flashing across her face. "They humiliated you so they could steal from you," Sarah said. "Linda, this isn't family conflict anymore. It's fraud. You can't stay quiet." Linda's chest tightened. "But they're still my family." Sarah placed a firm hand on hers. "Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. If you don't protect yourself, no one else will." Those words echoed through Linda's mind long after Sarah left. The next day at Mark's office, the attorney spread the documents across his desk. "You've got enough here to challenge them," he said. "Legally, morally, this isn't just a disagreement. This is deception. They cut you out deliberately, and if this blows up, you'll be their scapegoat." Linda swallowed hard. "So what are my options?" Mark leaned back, tapping his pen. 1. You confront them privately and demand they stop. 2. You expose them in front of the entire family exactly as Brian did to you. It's risky, but sometimes public truth is the only way to counter a public lie. Michael nodded slowly. They humiliated her in front of 40 people. Maybe it's time they get a taste of their own medicine. Daniel crossed his arms. "And I'll be there, Mom. You won't stand alone." Linda exhaled shakily, staring at the neat rows of numbers and signatures. She thought of Brian's smug smile, Maggie's smirk, Emily's silence, and her parents' approving nods. They had erased her without hesitation. Her hands curled into fists. Not anymore. That night, she returned home with her plan set. She would call for a family meeting, insist on everyone being there. If they had stripped her dignity in public, then in public she would lay bare the truth. Before bed, she tucked the folder into a fireproof safe Michael kept in his workshop. She felt strangely calm, as though she were fastening armor piece by piece. In the quiet dark, she whispered to herself, "You wanted me erased, but I am still here, and I will not be silenced." Michael stirred beside her, reaching for her hand. "We'll be ready," he murmured. Linda closed her eyes, the weight of fear still pressing down, but beneath it, the steady thrum of resolve. The battle was coming, and this time, she would not be the one caught off guard. The Harris dining room, once the stage of Linda's laughter-filled dinners, felt like a courtroom that evening. The long oak table stretched between her and the rest of the family, her parents at the head, Maggie perched beside Brian with her smug smile, Emily tight-lipped at his side, Tom shifting uncomfortably across from them. Cousins murmured at the edges, their eyes darting between plates of untouched food. Linda stood at one end, the folder of documents clutched in her hand. Michael sat behind her, steady as stone. Daniel stood tall at her side, his jaw set. Chloe lingered near the corner, her gaze locked on Linda with quiet encouragement. Richard cleared his throat. "Let's get this over with. You called this meeting, Linda. What do you want to say?" Linda set the folder on the table with a firm thud. "The truth," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "You all wanted me erased. You humiliated me at the party. You called me controlling. But this isn't about food or family dinners, is it?" Maggie smirked. "Oh, please, don't be dramatic." Linda flipped open the folder, spreading out the contracts Mark had given her. The papers fanned across the table like cards in a gambler's hand. "This is what you didn't want me to see. A bistro, $50,000, and the collateral Mom and Dad's home." Gasps rippled down the table. Tom leaned forward, his face paling as he scanned the papers. Brian scoffed, his voice oily. "You don't know what you're talking about. Those are business documents, nothing to do with you." Linda's eyes burned. "Nothing to do with me? You used my parents' house. You used our family name. And to clear the path, you painted me as a dictator, someone who needed to be silenced." Helen's voice was sharp. "Linda, you're twisting this. We supported Brian and Maggie because they have vision. You've had your turn running things." Daniel slammed his palm against the table, startling the room. Her turn? She's carried this family for decades. Every holiday, every event, you let her bleed herself dry while you sat back. And now you call it control? Emily shifted uncomfortably. Mom, maybe you're overreacting. Linda turned to her daughter, her voice breaking. Overreacting? You sat there while your husband humiliated me in front of everyone. Did you ever stop to ask why? Emily's lips parted, but no words came. She looked down at her hands, silent. Chloe stepped forward suddenly, her cheeks flushed. Aunt Linda's not lying. I saw the messages. I saw Maggie bragging about how once Linda was out of the way, you'd all have no choice but to support them. All eyes snapped to Chloe. Maggie's face went rigid. You sneaky little… Enough! Linda's voice cut through the room. The years of silence, the swallowing of insults, the forced smiles they all cracked open in that single word. You wanted me to be quiet. You wanted me erased, but you forgot who I am. I've always been the one who remembers, the one who keeps the records, the one who shows up. She gathered the papers and slid them toward Richard and Helen. This is what you signed. If their plan fails, and it will, you lose your home. And don't fool yourselves. Brian set it up so he walks away clean, while you and Maggie take the fall. Richard's face darkened as he scanned the contract. Helen's hand trembled on the paper. Tom finally spoke, his voice low but firm. She's right, I warned you, Maggie. You ignored me. The room fell into uneasy silence. Brian leaned back, his smile brittle now. So what, Linda? You think you've won? Families take risks together. Maybe you're just jealous because no one wants your potlucks anymore. Linda's chest rose and fell, but instead of rage, calm washed over her. She gathered the folder back into her arms. This isn't jealousy. It's survival. And if you want to gamble with lies and arrogance, do it without me. I'm finished carrying the weight of people who tear me down. Michael rose and placed a hand on her shoulder. Daniel stood taller beside her. Chloe's eyes glistened with pride. For once, Linda didn't wait for their approval. She didn't linger to explain or beg. She turned toward the door, her voice clear and final. You tried to erase me, but tonight I erased the lie. And with that, she walked out, her allies at her side, leaving the rest of the family staring at the wreckage of their own choices. The fallout was swift. 2 days after Linda laid the contracts on the table, the Harris family name was no longer whispered with admiration but with pity. Word spread through cousins and neighbors faster than wildfire. Maggie and Brian had gambled with the family's stability, and Linda had been the one to expose it. At the bakery, regulars leaned over the counter with hushed voices. We heard what happened, one woman said gently. Good for you, Linda. It's about time someone told the truth. Another added, You've always been the backbone of that family. They should be ashamed. For the first time in weeks, Linda felt her shoulders lighten. She hadn't asked for validation, but hearing it reminded her she wasn't crazy. She wasn't the villain Brian painted her to be. Maggie, however, was unraveling. Within days, the bistro project she had bragged about collapsed. Investors backed out after learning the collateral was shaky. The catering company canceled the order when the deposit bounced. Her social media page, once full of confident updates, turned quiet. Then, the whispers began, customers at her furniture shop muttering about the scam, friends unfollowing her, even neighbors crossing the street to avoid her. Brian fared no better. His colleagues at the finance firm caught wind of the failed scheme. He had leveraged his in-laws' property without disclosing the full risk. A supervisor pulled him aside and, within a week, he was on leave pending review. The sharp suits and smug smiles couldn't protect him from the reality that his credibility was crumbling. At home, Emily bore the brunt of the tension. She showed up at Linda's bakery one morning, her eyes rimmed red. Mom, she whispered, Brian won't talk to me. Maggie's furious. Grandma and Grandpa are… She broke off, tears spilling down her cheeks. Linda stood stiffly behind the counter. For a moment, instinct told her to reach out, to soothe her daughter the way she always had. But then she remembered the silence at the party, the way Emily had folded her arms and said, It's how everyone sees you. I'm sorry you're hurting, Linda said evenly. But you stood by him while he tore me down. You chose silence when I needed you most. Emily's face crumpled. She turned away without another word. Meanwhile, Richard and Helen struggled to face the truth. The documents Linda had revealed showed in black and white how Brian had maneuvered them. Richard, once so firm in his authority, sat in his recliner staring at the papers for hours. Helen snapped at anyone who mentioned the word restaurant, her pride too wounded to admit she had been duped. One evening, Tom called Linda. His voice was heavy. "They're humiliated, Linda. Dad keeps saying he can't believe he signed. Mom refuses to leave the house. And Maggie, she's blaming everyone but herself." Linda closed her eyes. For so long, she had yearned for her parents' approval. Now, their shame didn't bring satisfaction, it brought clarity. She had carried their judgment for decades, but in the end, they had judged themselves. At the next neighborhood gathering, Sarah pulled Linda aside. "I heard Maggie tried to throw another dinner," she said with a grin. "Half the guests didn't even show. The ones who did leave early cold food. No organization. People are starting to realize who really held that family together." Linda smiled faintly, though sadness lingered beneath. She hadn't wanted them to fail. She had wanted them to value her. But maybe failure was the only teacher they would listen to. That night, as she closed the bakery, Michael joined her at the counter. "You see it, don't you?" he asked softly. "See what?" she replied. "That you don't need their approval anymore. They destroyed their own reputation. You don't have to carry the shame they tried to put on you." "I'm cool." Linda looked out the window at the dark street beyond, her reflection faint against the glass. For the first time, she believed him. The humiliation that once belonged to her now clung to Maggie and Brian. And her parents, so quick to nod when she was insulted, were left to reckon with the weight of their choices. The next morning, Chloe stopped by before class. She hugged Linda tight. "Aunt Linda, everyone's talking about how brave you were. You didn't just defend yourself, you showed the truth. They can't take that away." Linda's throat tightened as she whispered back, "Maybe for once I didn't let them." The storm hadn't passed, but the winds had shifted. Maggie and Brian were no longer untouchable. Her parents were no longer unquestioned pillars. The masks had cracked, and the whole family saw what lay beneath. And Linda, the woman they had tried to erase, was still standing. The morning sun streamed through the bakery windows, catching the flour dust in golden beams. Linda wiped her hands on her apron and looked around the shop. Customers filled every table, chatting over coffee and warm pastries. There was laughter, warmth, the kind of community she had always dreamed her family gatherings would bring. She realized with a pang of clarity that this place, her bakery, her work, her circle of loyal neighbors had always been her true family. They saw her not as controlling but as capable, not as overbearing but as someone who gave without limit. A week had passed since Maggie and Brian's downfall, but the ripples continued. Word spread quickly about their failed bistro. Former supporters pulled away, and their names became synonymous with recklessness. Even Richard and Helen couldn't escape the whispers. Friends at their church murmured about poor judgment, about siding with the wrong people. For decades, Linda had lived under their criticism. Now, she felt their disapproval slide off her like water. They had lost the authority to define her. That evening, Linda hosted a small dinner at her house, not the elaborate banquets of the past, but a simple, intimate meal. Michael grilled chicken on the patio, Daniel brought wine, and Chloe helped toss a salad. Sarah and her husband joined, filling the night with easy conversation. As they gathered around the table, Chloe raised her glass. To Aunt Linda, for standing up when the whole family tried to push her down. The group echoed the toast, glasses clinking. Warmth spread through Linda's chest, not from the wine but from the recognition in their eyes. For once, she didn't have to earn it by sacrificing herself, it was freely given. After dinner, Daniel sat beside her on the porch. "You know, Mom," he said, "I think they expected you to stay quiet forever. That's why Brian went after you at the party. They thought you'd fold." Linda smiled faintly. "That's what I always did, didn't I?" I smiled, I swallowed my hurt, I kept cooking. "But not this time," Daniel said firmly. "You showed them you're not their scapegoat anymore." The words settled deep in her bones. She had spent so much of her life believing her worth was tied to her family's approval, but their betrayal had taught her something unexpected. Her value didn't depend on them. Later, as the guests left, Chloe lingered by the door. She hugged Linda tight, whispering, "You've shown me what strength looks like. I'll never forget that." Tears pricked Linda's eyes. She kissed her niece's cheek. "And you've reminded me I'm not alone." That night, Linda sat at the kitchen table with Michael. She opened the family group chat on her phone, the one she had muted weeks earlier. It was full of silence, no new messages since her confrontation. She hovered over the screen for a long moment, then pressed Leave Group. The notification popped up. You have exited the conversation. She exhaled, a long, trembling breath. I'm done, she said softly. Michael squeezed her hand. Done being their doormat. Linda nodded. Done being used. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. She no longer feared Maggie's smirks or Brian's arrogance, her parents' criticism or Emily's silence. They had tried to erase her, but in the end it was their own choices that erased their credibility. Linda had stood tall, told the truth, and walked away with her dignity intact. And as she closed her eyes that night, she whispered to herself a vow. Never again. I will never let anyone, family or not, dim my worth. The woman who once carried the family's burdens alone was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone unafraid to draw boundaries, someone who knew her value. Linda Harris had risen not as the family's servant, but as her own person. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and coffee that morning, just as it always had, but Linda knew change was in the air. She stood by the front counter, gazing at the neat rows of pastries. For years, this place had been her anchor, her way of proving her worth to a family that never truly saw her. Now, it had become something more, a symbol of her independence, her resilience, her strength. But she couldn't ignore the truth. She was tired of pouring every ounce of energy into holding together people who pulled her apart, tired of fighting for recognition that never came. The confrontation, the evidence, the fallout, they had taken something out of her, but they had also given her clarity. One evening, Linda sat with Michael and Daniel at the kitchen table. Chloe joined them, her textbooks spread across her lap. The four of them formed a quiet circle of support, the family that truly mattered. I've been thinking, Linda began, her voice steady but soft. The bakery has been my life for nearly 20 years, but maybe it's time to let go. Daniel frowned. Mom, you can't. This place is who you are. No, Linda said gently. It's what I've done. It's how I showed love when no one else gave it back. But love doesn't have to be measured in pies and holiday dinners. I want to live a life that's bigger than this building, bigger than proving myself to people who never cared. Michael reached across the table, taking her hand. If this is what you want, I'll stand with you, always. A month later, Linda hung a handwritten sign on the bakery window, for sale. The neighborhood buzzed with surprise, but she explained with a smile, it's time for someone new to carry it forward. Offers came quickly, and she chose a young couple eager to make the shop their dream. She taught them recipes, handed them her suppliers list, and wished them luck. Closing day arrived quietly. Linda locked the door for the last time, slipping the keys into an envelope. She felt a pang of sadness, but also an overwhelming lightness. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Meanwhile, the Harris family drifted further away. Maggie's furniture shop struggled after the failed bistro scandal. Brian's career never recovered. Whispers of his recklessness followed him everywhere. Richard and Helen, once so quick to criticize, kept to themselves, their circle of friends shrinking as their pride withered. Emily reached out once, sending a text, I miss you, Mom. Can we talk? Linda stared at the message for a long time before typing, I need space. If you're ready to respect me, I'll be here. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a boundary she had never dared draw before. With the bakery behind her, Linda turned toward new horizons. She began volunteering at the community center, organizing events for children and seniors. She poured her energy into projects that brought genuine joy, not obligations. Chloe often joined her, stacking chairs, leading games, laughing with the kids. Sarah stopped by with donations, reminding Linda that friendship could be stronger than blood. One afternoon, after a charity bake sale, a little girl tugged Linda's sleeve. This is the best day ever, the child said, crumbs clinging to her smile. You make everything special. Linda's throat tightened as she bent down, brushing a hand through the girl's hair. Thank you, sweetheart. That's all I ever wanted to do. That night, as she sat on the porch with Michael, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Linda felt peace settle into her bones. She had chosen herself. She had chosen freedom. She no longer needed to beg for a seat at her family's table. She was building her own table, surrounded by people who valued her presence, not just her labor. Linda Harris had walked through betrayal, humiliation, and loss. And now, she stood at the threshold of something new, an open road, a future where she could live not as a servant to other people's expectations, but as the woman she was always meant to be. Her voice was steady as she whispered into the quiet evening, "I'm free." Oh. Epilogue. The lesson of worth. The months after Linda closed her bakery and walked away from the Harris family became the most surprising of her life. Where once there had been noise criticism, gossip, endless demands, there was now quiet. At first, the silence felt foreign, even heavy. She had spent so long measuring herself against the impossible expectations of her parents, siblings, and even her daughter that stepping outside their shadow seemed unnatural. But slowly, she began to breathe differently. Her mornings were no longer dictated by ovens preheating at dawn or frantic phone calls from relatives demanding this dish or that decoration. Instead, she laced up her sneakers and went for walks with Michael, the man who had stood at her side through every storm. They strolled past tidy lawns and maple trees, talking about simple things: Daniel's graduation plans, Chloe's college dreams, the next community event she wanted to organize. At the community center, Linda discovered a joy she had never known in the Harris dining room. She organized birthday parties for children whose parents couldn't afford them, potlucks for lonely seniors, and holiday drives for families in need. These gatherings weren't about control or appearances. They were about love freely given and gratefully received. No one whispered behind her back. No one voted her out. Here, Linda wasn't too controlling or bland. She was exactly what she had always been: a giver, a builder of joy. Her family's downfall continued in the background. Maggie sold her shop at a loss. Brian drifted between odd jobs, his ambition rotted by scandal. Richard and Helen retreated into their home, rarely attending gatherings after friends stopped trusting their judgment. Even Emily's marriage strained under the weight of Brian's failures. Linda heard these things not from gossip she chased, but from whispers that reached her naturally. And instead of anger, she felt distance, like watching a storm rage miles away, no longer at her doorstep. One evening, as Linda and Chloe cleaned up after a clothing drive, Chloe hugged her tightly. "You've taught me something I'll never forget," the young woman said. "Family isn't just the people you're born into, it's the people who value you." Linda blinked back tears. That truth had cost her dearly, but it was worth every ounce of pain. For decades, she had believed loyalty meant enduring anything, even cruelty, for the sake of blood ties. But betrayal had shown her another truth: sometimes protecting yourself is the most loving choice of all. Linda Harris was no longer the woman begging for a seat at her family's table. She had built her own, and around it gathered people who cherished her not for what she could provide, but for who she was. As the sun set outside the community center that evening, she whispered to herself, "I am enough. I always was." Moral of the story: family betrayal can shatter the heart, but it can also strip away illusions. Linda's story reminds us that blood alone does not define loyalty. True family, whether bound by birth, friendship, or community, is made of those who see your worth and never ask you to shrink to earn their love. Sometimes, walking away isn't a weakness, it is the first act of strength. What would you have done if you were Linda? Would you forgive those who betrayed you, or walk away forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful family betrayal story.